So now we start with the final panel of the day on the agenda of foreign market penetration. This panel will be moderated by Ms. Asha Sampath and Mr. Sid Baliga. Mr. Sid and Ms. Asha, I would request you to take the seats. The first panelist we have today is Dr. Satish Raghavendra, Director Analytics at Cognizant. Can we have a round of applause, please? Dr. Satish Raghavendran has over 19 years of research and management experience and has held senior leadership positions in the United States at JP Morgan Chase & Company, American Express, Hibernia National Bank, and at Dell Financial Services. Dr. Satish, I would request you to take the seat, please. Please keep applauding. The next panelist we have is Mr. Joseph John, Director at British Deputy High Commission. Best described as a generalist, his former employers include the UK government, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, Hutchinson, and Travelex. In his current role, he leads on the technology and global business services sectors for Scotland in India. Can we have a round of applause, please? The next panelist we have is Mr. Ashu Agrawal. He has over 12 years of experience in central and state business consultant, venture capital, media, investment, banking, and financial services. He was also one of the first entrepreneurs in the country to work on a mass market money management product before many others. The final panelist we have today is Ms. Komal Jha, Senior Consultant at Deloitte. Madam, please take a seat. Komal is a consulting professional with experience in contributing and leading in project delivery in global healthcare space across South Asia and North American markets. She is a recognized subject matter expert known for building and implementing numerous complex business process management assets to increase productivity for large businesses. I welcome all the panelists again, and I would hand over the stage now to Ms. Asha and Mr. Sid. Thank you very much.
Good evening to all the panelists and to all the audience. Pardon me for starting the discussion on a slightly negative note. 2019 has not been a great year. 2020 promises to be a better one. The economy hasn't performed great. Not enough jobs have been created. Consumer data is not impressive. There's a skewed demand-supply situation, and there is liquidity crisis that is percolating across the value chain. So the demand for goods and services in India are obviously not great. Under these circumstances, I think the logical strategy for any brand would be to explore areas where they can see better potential, like the APAC or the US and the UK. But are the Indian brands exploiting the complete potential that's available overseas in terms of expanding their market share there, or do you think a lot more needs to be done? We can start with Satish, and probably I'd like to throw this to all the panelists.
In terms of the most challenging year, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, if they haven't done, which better time than now? So, but the evidence is very mixed. If you look at the various industries in automotive sector or in other thing, there are people who have been a lot more proactive in some sectors, and there are stragglers. The part of the reason is that the perception of the brand is also intimately tied to the value proposition of the brand that offers, be it a product or a service. There, I think a lot of soul searching is required in terms of, the reason is that, the advantage I've had is working in the consulting industry. I've seen a lot of products and services fail because the unique value proposition it has not been clearly communicated to the customer. And I've seen for every successful one, there are 10 failures. The same kind of introspection needs to happen across sectors, and there is no two ways about it. One of the reasons is in the communication of the value proposition, what our brands have to offer. If it is established through various things, be it a reliable offering or be it unique or demonstrating an understanding of what the local needs are, some companies have been very quick to do that. For example, in the automotive sector, they have sensed a particular type of brand is useful in an economy of a similar size. Typically in economy, it's like a surrogate. That kind of a sensing ability which some of the companies have would be the clear competitive advantage that they have. So in a way that it is flexing their muscle rather than taking markets for granted, to really work hard to strive, and also sometimes even to position your product or a service overseas, you have to be intelligent about whether that exists, that ecosystem is there. How do you penetrate it? My thing is, if you get the value proposition right, the penetration is tactical. If you don't get the value proposition of what you're after and what you can communicate unique, then the modes of penetrations are more likely to fail. So I would say that value proposition should be the key anchor, and the strategy to enter is only secondary in my personal opinion. And the good ones, there are enough good examples in the business world that have exactly followed what I've said.
Thank you, Ashram. What we're seeing from the UK perspective is in the last 5 to 6 years, we had seen a substantial amount of high inward investments coming into the UK. So from 2013 until 2017, if I could quote, we had about 22 companies from Hyderabad who had invested in the UK, right? Ever since, we had seen a sort of a decline in the kind of investments which are going into the UK, partly for two reasons for that. Firstly, you would want to talk about the uncertainty which Brexit has posed and which it is still posing at this point in time. Secondly, I feel that, in the last few years, India has, the world is coming to India as well, right? The market size is so huge, and then you see a lot of opportunities here as well. So most of the companies do feel that, it might be better for them to stay in India itself, capture the domestic market, and then look at the foreign markets. To answer your question, are the companies looking, or the companies who are already there in the UK market, have they exploited the opportunity to the fullest? I think I can confidently say the answer is no. Because what happens is when you enter into a particular market, you've got to customize your entire, operating plan to suit that particular market. And most Indian companies that we have engaged with, we see that, they haven't been able to optimize that process completely to a great extent to reap the rewards of it. You'd be surprised to know that companies from Hyderabad, companies like Cyient, one of the iconic companies here, they have invested in the UK right from 2005 itself. So the companies have been ambitious, but the challenge here is, we don't see that kind of a bullish approach with the current set of companies in the recent time. It's a bit of a more risk-averse approach that we are seeing right now. But of course, there are some, companies who are placing high bets as well.
So I think two very interesting perspectives, right? I think I completely agree that penetration is tactical and what you've said, right? I think so. I work with W Hub and Angel Hub, right? We're essentially investing platform which is based out of Hong Kong and Greater Bay Area, right? We've just entered India. So I think one of the first things, and I will come to answering your question, just sort of background, right? So I think one of the few things that we are trying to sort of now do is establish a corridor between India and Hong Kong and Greater Bay Area, right? For startups and businesses from there to come into India, and for Indian businesses to go out and sort of be operating out of there. Now, they're not necessarily large areas. China is a very different kind of a market, a very different palette, right, in terms of how they consume things. It's a slightly more complex market, right? I think what we are really sort of channelizing and what we're prioritizing is capital, right? Because, Chinese capital today is looking for higher growth markets and markets with a density which matches their own, right? So I think that's something that we're trying to sort of do. We're trying to sort of put a corridor together, which essentially means that the movement is going to be much faster. Now, coming back to your question, which is, given the economic and the macroeconomic scenario in India, is this a better alternative to sort of look at international markets? I think when you are a business, right, I think what you're constantly looking for is faster conversion, right? You're essentially looking at momentum in cash flow, right? Even as venture capitalists, when you're looking to sort of invest in a company, we are looking at that as an element, right? How quickly can an engagement translate into consumption, right? Into cash flows. And Western markets, developed markets, largely because of the kind of education that they've had, the amount of disposable that they've had, and so many other macros that sort of go in their favor, have an ability to purchase better, faster. They're not necessarily that the element of inhibition is negligible, right? So they're not necessarily worried about going wrong, which is a very typical Indian trait, right? We want to experience before buying, and we want to negotiate till the last. So I think those are some of the factors that are there, and I think businesses should definitely look at it, right? Now, are Indian businesses doing it to the fullest or not? I think it's a mixed response, right? In certain cases, yes. In certain cases, no. And that is largely, especially in the startup ecosystem, in the early stage ecosystem. I can't really comment about SMEs, MSMEs, and large corporates. I'll not be the right guy to sort of comment about it. I mean, startup ecosystem is where I work. What is happening is, expansion, for example, into the US market is very expensive, right? Even UK, for that matter, is a fairly expensive, region to sort of. Europe is an expensive region to operate out of, right? The problem becomes that we don't have adequate amount of capital, or a higher valuation which is backing those startups, right? Thus it becomes very difficult. They become resource constrained to operate in markets like that, right? Where the cost of acquisition is going to be high, your cost of operations is going to be high, so many other things, right? So that is not really factored in, which really handicaps the company to expand into these markets. I think those are some of the key challenges. I think most of the founders who are operating in these, in the startup ecosystem at least, are very clued on to what's happening in the Western world, because that's a very strong reference point, right? That gives us a guiding light and direction, all that. So everybody's privy to it. It's just that the resources don't add up to a point where they can sort of expand into those markets. So I think that's largely one of the reasons.
Yeah, thank you for those points. And I think most of the important points have been covered by now, but there is one particular point that I would like to emphasize on. And that is the key challenge that Indian companies face in going to these foreign markets is the trust they inspire in the consumers over these countries. So I was going through a report some time back, and there was a poll done by a selected group for the brands that are coming from India, and for that matter, from Asian markets. And all these brands, like most of these brands, performed poorly on that. So that the trust that we inspire in some of the matured markets in North America and Europe is not that great. And how customers in these markets perceive a brand is by 4 major factors. First being government, the second being the NGOs in that country, third is media, and the fourth is the business itself. And what was interesting to look at is that when the customers were looking at these particular brands, and their mindset about the country of origin of that brand was majorly influenced by government and least influenced by the business itself. And when they rated these confidence factors, they rated government to be least reliable and the business itself to be most reliable. So it's not just the problem with the business. The ideas are great, the business is great, but where the area where we can't compete is the surrounding environmental factor that causes that perception.
Yeah. So thank you. I think I'm picking up 2 points from Komal's points, and Joseph. Joseph had made an interesting point about global, countries coming to India because seeing the domestic demand in India, we have such a big market, and Indian companies not maybe wanting to go overseas because they see a lot of scope here itself. Okay. And obviously about Komal, you said that there's a perception thing which is coming into play. Is it also because we are more happier doing services for US or Europe, or we think that our products are not good enough to be launched in foreign markets? Because we have primarily been a back office providing IT services, IT solutions to US and Europe. So are we content with that? Do we not want to take major risks by expanding overseas? Or we feel inferior already that we are perceived to be, our products are perceived to be inferior in quality. What are the reasons? Anybody?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. So one thing that I see, I wouldn't say that we perceive ourselves or we underestimate the potential that we have in the country. But what is important for us to go to these markets is to find that niche where we want to operate in. So, and to understand what are the local sensibilities in those countries. I may have a great product with me, but that may not align with the sensibility of that market or the perception of that market. So what is important for me as a business is to understand what the market needs and how it perceives my product, and not just sell myself as a brand that originated in India, but as a brand that the customer wants, no matter where it originated.
So that's very interesting. Give what the customer wants, not what you have. That's very interesting. You have something to say, please.
I think the Clayton Christensen has an idea called unmet jobs. So every product or a service is supposed to meet a job. You're using a pen, it performs a particular job. If you espouse that level of understanding about anything, then you are not worried about borders. That requires a lot of effort and initiative on part of the business as well. To see in those geographies what are those unmet needs that the existing people are not able to fulfill. I mean, Indians, we are very competent, bright people. If they can only engage their mind on the same set of problems in India as well as abroad, then you don't have to look at the product from a geographic point of view, whether we are going to sell in US or need, because most human beings' needs are, on a large scale similar. But the problem is to get that LCM and crack it, then you can create a universal product. And they have used this product, this kind of a thinking quite successfully in many of the startups. They don't even look at the segment first. They look at what is the need that has not been met. If you take that idea, then you will be able to have a much bigger impact.
I'll just sort of quickly add to that. I think that's not necessarily a shortcoming, right? Being a services, this thing is not necessarily a shortcoming. I think it's a phenomenal foundation to go out and build a great product, right? I mean, we've had Freshworks, which has come out of here, right? Look at that. That's an incredible product, which is being used globally, right? And there are so many others, right, which are in a SaaS format or in a B2B environment that are being used by a lot of international players. The foundation essentially started from a services engagement, right? And we have a lot of examples, right? I think it is about the exposure. I'll give you a small example. So I was heading a project called I Start with the government of Rajasthan. This was in the second half of 2018. Was director of the initiative. We were working very closely with the CM's office. We're doing all of that, right? We took about 100 kids to the Silicon Valley, right? Now, in certain cases, they had, and they were made to pitch, right, of their ideas and stuff, right? And they were, the investors there were zapped to listen to some of these pitches, right? And they could relate to that, and they want to sort of, bite into that in form of an investment, and and can we incubate them, and so on and so forth, right? The biggest of all problems is exposure. The biggest of all issues is exposure, right? So it's not about the trust, right? I mean, trust is something which is a function of how much do you ask for a certain service, right? If you can continue to, and you can continue to adjust that over a period, right? Across conversations, it will come to a point where the other person is willing to try, right? Give it to you for that moment. I agree to the point that you highlighted that, larger enterprises want some sort of, a sense of confidence, right? That this business is going to go on. And I think that's a function of capitalization, right? If we can continue to do that, we'll have more businesses to sort of, which will be catering to the international markets, will be exploiting a bigger opportunity. That's essentially how I look at it.
So when we talk about unmet needs, so we say, can we take an example of, say, an Indian brand like Bata versus an international brand like Nike? So we have unmet need for Nike in India, but do we see the same kind of demand for Bata, or are we not creating that demand elsewhere outside India? We perceive Nike to be superior, right?
That's a very interesting question, but the way I would think is that there is a need. Nike identified a need for the brand in India, but if we want Bata to be accepted by customers there, we can probably find out other creative ways. There is always an unmet need. So, like there are some examples of apparel brands which have taken the Indian essence, fused it with Western concept, and then launched it there. And there was a demand for that, and people appreciated that. So I think that is the approach that brands, when they are willing to go to foreign markets, they have to find out what is that they want to sell.
So basically, right now they are not voluntarily trying to go abroad. So that is what we can infer.
There are resources. I mean, you're stuck up, right? There's no liquidity. Yeah. There are very few people who are ready to finance you to go out and explore, right? That's a bigger challenge in today's time.
Right.
So Ashu, you were mentioning about valuation issues, right? Valuation does not allow macro level exponential growth. There's a report that I think it's from Google India and KPMG, which says that there's a $39 billion opportunity for Indian brands going global.
Okay.
If they were to use this opportunity,
what kind of an opportunity is this? 39 billion. I mean, what is
and
it?
that's what the report says.
Okay.
It says it's a $39 billion opportunity for Indian brands wanting to grow global. Sure. And it also specifies the sectors where the potential is there, and it also mentions about how APEC countries are the right market to go global at this point of time. What I'm trying to understand is to unleash this opportunity, should the Indian brands be looking at acquisitions, or is organic growth a better option for them to what kind of a vision should they have? Should it be organic or?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, honestly speaking, if you really ask me, we are better off acquiring companies that are already there, right? I mean, you're getting a lot of local talent. You're getting people who understand the cultural aspects of it, the conditionality of it. So you're much better, right? The movement is going to be much faster. The problem is we don't have the monies. I mean, in the for example, 7-8 years that I've been involved with the startup ecosystem and the venture capital ecosystem, right? I have not seen a company at an idea stage getting a certain amount of commitment and monies, right? We are hard buyers, okay? We negotiate very, very hard. We want as much, right? 3% of our savings is equity as an instrument, right? Out of all of 100% savings, right? So you can only imagine the kind of trust deficit that we have when we're looking at equity as an instrument to be invested in, right? It's a massive challenge. Where's the money? The problem is we're not giving higher valuations, unlike West, right? Where there are massive valuations. So even for an inorganic growth, you need financing, right? Our banking system is, again, not a very leveraged banking system, right? We continue to be a managed, controlled banking system, which has also sort of saved us from a lot of aberrations that exist in the market. But those are some real challenges. But I think if startups can continue to sort of buy companies outside, that will be phenomenal. We've seen auto component companies buying a lot of Eastern European companies, largely from an expansion standpoint. That happened, right? What's currently the status? I don't think it'll be fair to comment right now. But I think Indian entrepreneurs have looked for those opportunities. Problem is financing, right? We are anyway, India is a low margin game, right? We are operating in a commoditized, most of the businesses that we are in are essentially operating in a commoditized zone, right? So your ability to have larger profits is a function of financing which is available, and then over a period your ability to go out and experiment with other things, right? I think those are some of the complexities that are there that need to sort of be tackled. I think financing is really the core issue, and not financing when I say financing from banks, but I think of listing more of public money coming into startup ecosystem, or even the mainstream ecosystem, private equity becoming big. I think those are means of financing that we're looking at. That's the kind of risk capital movement that you're looking at. That has to come at the foundation level, and I think that really sort of is going to help getting to these numbers.
Apart from financing, Ashu, do you also think there is a lack of innovation?
Not really.
Are we repackaging and only innovating business models instead of imitating the West and taking models from there?
No, I don't think so. I kind of agree with that. I think it's always good to know. I mean, Sunil Bharti Mittal got into telecom because he was at a certain conference and CES or some of the other exhibitions that happened, right? That's where his love affair with telecom started, right? So entrepreneurs need to go out. Exposure is very, very important. The good thing today is that it's internet, right? We know pretty much all of the mediums. A lot is being talked about, a lot is being covered. There's social media. You can connect with pretty much anybody and everybody, and you can continue to sort of talk and discuss. So information and availability is not there, right? So I think, are these guys prepared for a global play? Yes, they are, right? I think they need to work in that environment. Some sort of hand-holding has to happen. I think if that can sort of happen, it'll be phenomenal. They will come out with the products. That's how I look at it. Typically, what happens for the venture capital ecosystem, one thing that I can tell you is that, even if you're traveling, right, you go through the net, you'll look at, what are the places that you can go to. You'll have a rough itinerary of sorts in place, right? You don't want to be caught up in a situation which is where there's nothing, right? There's no plan, right? You want to plan. So even for the venture capital ecosystem, you're putting money on larger possibilities, but you typically look at some sort of a reference point. You have to go out and explain to your limited partners, right? So it's not necessarily aping, but I think you look at what's happened in the West. You look at the maturity of the Indian market. You look at the kind of money that is going to be required to build a similar business or the nature of that business, and that's when the money really comes in. So it's not necessarily aping. I'm not going to completely agree with you on that one.
Dr. Satish, what's your take on that?
My thing is that, for example, I can empathize with smaller companies having those constraints, which are real, not able to scale funding. But what for me is a bigger paradox is if you look at the FMCG industry, the whole Western world talks about the wellness industry. They want organic products. Which country can deliver organic products than us? In the companies like Dab, there are big companies here. They haven't done enough soul searching because they have already having their having a thick margins that is quite alluring and this thing. So they haven't. I think now, because of severe competition, the economists now they will be forced. These are all given cash cows for us. Perhaps we should not become complacent. Then we will become history. I am surprised that if they can, in fact, there are a lot of companies who can take this industry to the next level, partnering with the West, because there's a huge need there. And I think for those companies, they have enough capital, so partnership is the way to go. They can do other things, but there are so many across the world. Even you look at some small countries in South America that sources coffee beans for Starbucks. They proudly announce that we have used organic manure. When they can do it, which is like nowhere in compared to India in terms of economy. Why can't we do it? I'm only putting the question back to our own people. Why are they become complacent? Why are they not hungry to really dominate the world? That's my take on it.
So stay hungry.
Right. I would like to move to a B2B space and discuss about that. From my own experience, I feel that there are very low entry barriers for intermediary products coming into India. And that's what goes into an end product. Ultimately, we pitch that in the international market. So do you think the perception of quality not being on par with international standards arises from the fact that we have low entry barriers for intermediary products? Or do you think that is really not material impact? Maybe we can start with Joseph.
Yeah. That's not really my area of expertise because my primary area is taking Indian companies to invest in the UK. But if I were to give you a comment, I think there is a difference when you look at the services rendered by an Indian company versus the quality of service rendered by a foreign company. And I would say that because we have seen these instances first-hand experience in the UK itself. What can be done to improve that further is something, hiring local people within the UK operations to improve the efficiency of the organization in some shape or form. I think that would be a stimulant. But otherwise, I think it's not really my area of expertise to comment on that. But I'll just go back on a couple of other points which the fellow panelists have commented as well. Say for example, if the markets were to be really absolutely fine and if there's enough cash in the market and companies, then I think I would like to go back to the point that acquisition is definitely the best route to entry. We've seen a lot of Hyderabadi companies do that, and Pan India as well. We've seen those companies following the acquisition route as well. There was another comment made in terms of financing, right? Most of the entrepreneurs don't understand this, or it's primarily because of their ignorance. Government agencies are willing to help foreign investors to come into their home countries by also providing them with financing options as well, right? This is often ignored, and this is probably because they are not really aware about these SOPs or these benefits which are actually available in a foreign country. And the last comment that I would like to make is, yes, we see that most of the large companies are driven on contracts, and it's only when they have a contract there is an urge for them to set up an entity there. But what we are seeing very recently is we see that the younger companies who have recently raised capital, they're quite bullish in terms of approaching into foreign markets as well. So those are the three comments which I wanted to make. But in terms of the other question, I think it'll be best suited for somebody else.
That's okay. I think that was a very interesting perspective about how the funding is happening for Indian brands wanting to go global. So that probably answers the question that inorganic growth may be a more affordable option compared to acquisitions.
Yeah, that's in case of if there is money in the market, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if in a normal scenario, I think
Right.
that's an excellent way, as Ashu did mention.
Right.
That's the right way to enter the market.
Excellent.
I think just one sort of a quick point. At least, I can't really sort of comment about the SMEs, MSMEs. Most of the guys that I've seen, who've acquired assets outside, have largely been able to do it through a debt route, right? Where they've actually gone out, they've either raised, a percentage of debt in India, and then they've had a complementing match outside because of the size of balance sheet that they could have. And it's an international bank which is involved, which could do it in that market, right? It's been a debt largely a scenario, right? But as soon as you start to look at from an equity standpoint, there is little which is available, right? On the government side, most of the incentives that the government really gives you is in terms of tax ops, right? They'll possibly give you more, relaxations in terms of, pretty much all of compliances and everything, right? No direct cash really comes in. I think the direct cash, at least in my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I have seen come is, for example, initiatives which like a Singapore government has launched, right? Where they've said that these are the 3 or 4 or 5 basically venture capital funds that we identified. Any of these guys funding you, we will do a matching funding up to $5 million, right? That is one of the pieces that we've seen, but that's essentially to move innovation into their country, right? The thought process is very, very different. It's not necessarily to create, say, an employment impact or whatever. It's essentially to become a hub for innovation and also be transacting, right? So I think it's really sort of built and designed to suit that as a requirement. Just to sort of answer the question that you said about the intermediaries, right? I think we have Indian companies right now which are, especially auto components, right? You have companies that are catering into the Volkswagens of the world and the Mercedes of the world and the Rolls-Royce of the world, and there are quite a few, right? I mean, if you look at North India, there are quite a few. Pharma, again, we're doing fairly well. Chemicals, we're doing fairly well, right? Garments, we're doing phenomenally well. I mean, it's now, of course, started to shift to the Bangladeshis of the world and the Pakistans of the world and all that, but we've been doing a fantastic job as far as that area has been concerned, that business vertical is concerned. I think what has really happened is, for foreign brands also to come into India and source from India, I think it's a very complex environment. They have to deal with national, national level laws and all of that, and then have to sort of look at state. Now, only with GST coming in, there's a certain parity which has come in terms of the taxation ecosystem that we've had. Otherwise, it's been a very diverse system. For them to really understand is a big problem. Second is, I mean, you want a government which is a very complex environment, right? The regionality plays a very big role. You want neutrality in terms of your outlook, right? Politics for us for the longest time has had, religion based elements, right? Which is not a great thing. So I think those are things that create a very perceptive sort of an issue, which also you highlighted in when you're talking about. That gives a sense of inconsistency or possible inconsistency, and that really makes larger companies to come and either set up their own shops or buy, or even procure. They bring in that element of uncertainty, and that's not something that as a business owner one would be comfortable with.
So the opportunities are there. It's up to us to reorient ourselves. Is that what you say?
I think we are too large in economy. I mean, when you're talking about South America, right? I mean, look at the size of. I mean, I stay in NCR, right? Population of NCR is more than Australia, right? I mean, what are we talking about? So I think our complexities, and then of course, within NCR there are other regions, right? I was in the panel yesterday as well here, and I was looking at, when we were talking about the regionality. For example, we were talking about Andhra. Right? I said there are amazing people here, right? I mean, this is my first time when I've actually come to Hyderabad. I've spent some time and I've spoken. I said, people are amazing, right? Not necessarily, you look at there is a very different nuance to it when you, as soon as you start looking up north, right? So Punjab is going to be different, UP is going to be different. So there's no consistency, unlike say Western world, right? Where you have a certain homogeneity within the large percentage of the population.
There's one point and a slightly different dimension that I would like to bring in. So we spoke about B2B space, and particularly in terms of service industry. So I do agree that there are certain challenges in Indian companies who are service providers to some of the foreign markets, and particularly to North American and European markets. So, and it's not without reason that these markets think that our services are not at par with other firms. So there are cultural barriers on our side, there are linguistic barriers on our side, and there is, so because of those barriers, the service that we provided may not be perceived as good as actually the core of the service is. So for example, we have software industry and we have SaaS, and we are service providers in a number of industries. So the communication skill that the large workforce here exhibit, so at times it's not at par with what they expect. And it's a good thing that the companies in India have now started realizing that if they want to compete in those markets, they have to have a pool of resources which are ready for that. They need to have a leadership which is globally minded, and they need to have the employees and the people who are working for it suitable for those roles.
Komal, you made two important points regarding linguistic barriers and cultural barriers. Just adding to that, are we also facing barriers on thinking about strategic marketing? I'll give you an example, what I'm thinking about. In India, we still require Shah Rukh Khan to come and promote Byju's education. Okay, so where I don't see any connection why Shah Rukh Khan should promote education and kids should get influenced and log on to Byju's to study mathematics or prepare for IIT JEE. Okay, are we not able to think out of the box, and is that a reason why we are not able to market our products outside?
Well, to some extent, yes, but then I would like to quote a very interesting example. So when Marico wanted to expand to some of the West Asian countries with their product, which is in India sold as parachute oil. So in India, if you see a commercial of parachute, you would see a woman with a very beautiful long hairs and like people admiring her. And then when they went to West Asia, they knew that in some of the Arab countries, that is not what they want to show. So they changed their commercial, and they still showed a woman with very beautiful hairs, but they showed a child admiring her. So those are the nuances of how you commercialize a product and how you understand that how the market you are going in, you understand the sensibility of the market.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? I recently was with an Israeli panel, right? And all of us know of the challenges that Israel has had for the longest time, right? They aren't the best of English speakers, right? So there is this. It takes them time to sort of process and then respond, right? It's not as fluent. I mean, we actually speak English in possibly the finest sort of way. You'd be surprised how they think, right? I was with this company which is led by a woman CEO, which is phenomenal, right? And this is into robotics, right? You have to look at the passion. Second, you have to look at the brilliance of the product, the way she's been. I mean, the intensity was phenomenal. I have a daughter. My daughter is 7 years, right? I wanted to, just by looking at that product, quick 30 seconds into that product, I wanted to buy that product, right? But and that's I think that's something that we need to have sort of ingrained within the kids here, right? I think a lot of what we should really do is that these kids got to travel, right? I think they have to look at markets outside. They have to be exposed. I think it's really a function of exposure. I think that'll start to reflect in businesses as well. So I think if exposure can be built, I think that could be phenomenal. Just on your point to Shah Rukh Khan, right? I think I find this particular ad very funny. It's Country Delight Milk, right? And by the end of that advertiser, I don't know if you've heard of that or not. It says an IIT IM alumni venture, right? So they use that to bring in that element of credibility to what they're doing, which is kind of funny. They've been trolled for it, but I think, yeah, I mean, you constantly looking for reference points, right? Which people can relate with, people can be can associate with. Eventually leads into consumption. I mean, Byju's today is doing 200 crores of revenue every single month. I mean, Shah Rukh Khan, no Shah Rukh Khan, I think it's selling, right? So I think let's look at it that way.
So what I gather from this is when we talk of localization, sensitivity to local needs, unmet needs and local requirements, I think it's not just the product or the service per se, it's also the go-to-market strategies, the branding, the marketing, all of it as a holistic approach has to be localized in order to make a breakthrough. Am I right? Joseph, what sectors do you think Indian brands should be looking at if they were to make better headway into UK,
Sure.
notwithstanding the Brexit challenge that will hopefully disappear at some point?
Sure. So in the recent years, what we have seen is when I started my career with the British Deputy High Commission, we used to see a mixed bag of investments coming into the UK. And that was predominantly into the life science sector, Dr. Reddy's, Aurobindo, to name a few, from Hyderabad. We had a good mix of technology companies as well. We saw a mix of steel companies who were investing from Hyderabad into the UK as well. Over a period of, I think, 4 years or so, we have seen a dominance in the technology sector, which has been attracting a lot of inward investments into the UK. And it's not just from Hyderabad alone, I'm talking about pan-India. The numbers have risen in the technology space. And I think the reason why it is increased is because, technology, unlike the life sciences sector, you don't have to go through a huge process of, the clinical trials, getting your FDA approvals and things like that, right? MHRA approvals for the UK. So I see that's increased phenomenally, the technology side of things. From the Scottish perspective, our primary sectors have been the technology. It's the number one sector that we focus our energies on. The second sector is the financial services sector. And finally, we look after the customer experiences sector. Last year, we were in for a surprise. We saw a phenomenal amount of investment in the hospitality and tourism sector in Scotland, right? We saw OYO rooms coming into Scotland. We saw the Lulu Group invest in a property for 17 million in Edinburgh. We saw Bharati, we all knew this for quite some time now, that Bharati Mittal's son-in-law has got a significant stake in Gleneagles golf course as well. So we are in for a surprise. That's how we were a bit surprised, but what we feel that, these are the top three sectors for us from a Scottish government perspective, not just for India, for the whole of, our operations around the world. But that does not mean that we will not help any other investor in any other sector. But these are the top three sectors for us.
Very interesting pointers for people wanting to make a headway there. What exactly do you mean by customer experience sector?
So we're looking at the contact centers, the business shared services.
Okay. Like the call centers.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Fine. You want to ask him? Okay, Satish, my next question to you be about, and we all know that India has a large share of unorganized market. And is that one of the roadblocks for Indian brands not being able to go global? Because a lot of the Indian brands actually outsource the products to the unorganized sector, and then probably that's where the buck stops. They don't take it forward. So is there a possibility that with the recent moves on GST and demonetization, of course we are not seeing a lot of impact of that on the unorganized space. It's still going on. So do you think that could change things in the future in terms of being able to be more global players? Or do you think there are any other improvements that the government has to look at in order to make this happen?
See, if you look at the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, it's massive. But if you look at the stories that we hear in the news, it's only, I would say, rather incomplete or partial. For example, our MNCs would look at, micro sachets as a way to promote a product in the bottom of the pyramid. that's only one tip of the iceberg. They have, in my opinion, not capitalized on it fully. They have only found out by making a small quantity that I could sell, have a huge margin and market my product to the people in the unorganized sector with low incomes. But even at their level, there are so many needs that they haven't met. For example, there is one. If you look at the Jugaad innovation and all those things, we mention in the passing, but we haven't really spent time thinking about it in a commercial way. I'm only urging that if you really want to make money at the bottom of the pyramid, there are alternative ways, and the time is now. There are, we only see that in the passing, some washing machine being converted into a lassi maker. It brings a grin on the face, and a nano being used to till this thing. But those are all odd things. But I'm saying this itself can be a systematic investigation by these companies themselves, rather than just repackaging the materials in a smaller quantity for a larger margin. Even that sector still is, in my opinion, not fully catered to. That can be a gold mine if correctly tapped into. That's my point of view. And the newer environment will definitely, the current economic situation will force companies to look at them in a different lens than the standard lens that they're used to.
So do you think international certifications could help make better perceptions about Indian products?
Absolutely, because the reason is that, in this day and age, anything that is printed is not validated. So in our own things, like a lot of times in the traditional things that we have invented, we are never, the patenting is very new to the Indian mindset. Our thing was always the knowledge was like an open source. Even the open source community should be grateful to our country, because open source and knowledge was an ancient kind of a thing. So that way, if they can only bring out all those things and make sure that the right set of stakeholders are repeatedly reinforced, then you can see a sea change in the mindset. It's an issue of mindset, and having to look at that sector in a particular lens. If they change the lens, there's a tremendous opportunity, I personally believe, that sector has to offer.
Would anybody like to add? Komal?
Yeah. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Just to add on the certifications bit, we talked about the customer experience centers, right? So we have a body called the CCA based out of Scotland. It's called the Contact Center Association. And the way it works is, they certify the contact centers around the world. And once you have that certification, the likelihood to get more contracts with that certification is much higher. And we have few companies who are already, on that member list because they see value in getting that certification. So I totally agree with what Sir mentioned right now. No, it's around the world. It's around the world, yeah. So the likelihood of getting more contracts based on certification is much higher. Yeah.
Komal?
Sorry, I cut you off.
So I wanted to talk in the context of medical tourism industry in India. So we spoke about organized and unorganized sector. So healthcare is largely an unorganized sector in India. So it's like less than 5% of Indian healthcare is organized, and that is it. Now, when we talk about medical tourism, there are patients who are being referred to India for the purpose because the quality of care that they would get here is at par with the Western world. And the second, there is a huge cost difference between the treatment cost in some of the other countries versus that on India. Now, when a patient is referred from some of these foreign countries to India, the person, the doctor, the physician who is referring that patient to India would look at, the primary thing that he would look at is whether the hospital in India is JCI accredited. And JCI is the accreditation body for hospitals globally. Now, there are of the 5% that are less than 5% that I spoke about, there is even fewer number of hospitals which are JCI accredited. Now, given the workforce and the medical workforce, the medical expertise in India and the standard of facilities, there are many hospitals in India which provide quality of care at par with those. So there's a huge potential for India to become a medical tourism hub. And the one prominent reason that we have not been able to do so is we have not been able to organize some of those healthcare providers and being able to bring them up and provide them with that accreditation. So I think, yes, that is a major blocker in this sector.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I think just sort of a quickly, so accreditation or certification, right? is an expensive process, okay? The biggest of all problems why it's not been adopted or there's a constant delay, all right? A large enterprise can definitely go in and they can do that, right? But for within the startup ecosystem or a mid-level, right? Or in general, right? I think anything which makes your delivery expensive, right? I think will constantly be pushed, right? So, and it purely cannot only be a branding exercise, right? It has to really be accepted and implemented, right? And if the cost of for example, if it's high, it still can be sort of either say be discounted or subsidized or something of that sort. I think that's what will really lead to this adoption. Do we need it? 100%. We need a lot of that. Learning has to be constant. Even in a business environment, it has to be constant, right? But the cost of getting such certifications, accreditations has to come down, I think, for a business. For us as a country, the opportunity is arbitrage, right? Our ability to offer things at a lower price vis-a-vis how it's being, or the price it's being acquired at internationally, right? We cannot have anything which takes away that advantage from us, right? That will constantly be delayed. So that's the only sort of an issue when it comes to these aspects.
You're saying getting accreditation for larger enterprises could be shared easier, whereas the mid-level companies could struggle a bit.
I mean, it's a cash flow prioritization. It's a cash flow prioritization, right? I mean, here it's going to be, so even if it impacts, so for example, I'm working in a business which is, I'm operating in a business which is extremely highly commoditized business where I'm working on just about 7, 8, 10% margins, which is a very standard play across businesses, right? A 1% cost of certification year on year is cutting down on my profitability, right? Towards the end. I'm not going to go for that. I want to constantly push it, right? For me, that 1% could lead into a variety of other things, right? So I think that's essentially how it has to sort of be looked at.
So for that particular, that particular part of the value chain, they should have a separate credentialing. The reason is that whether we like it or not, even when we have acquired a habit of inspecting everything. For example, it doesn't contain animal products. Even I've used the same soap 10 years ago, it felt the same, but somehow it seems to feel better reading that. Maybe it's a defect in my thing, but that's a kind of a habit the companies have promoted, that it's almost a credential obsessed society. So you will have to play to that. I mean, a lot of people, companies, zoom in on that little thing. It is not made up of this thing. Even though it is not there, but the fact is seeing, people tend to trust that and it forms that perception. It's needed, yeah. But the thing is that even for the lower thing, they should have an alternative ways to do, instead of having them to do heavy duty scrutiny, an equivalent one, so that they also would have, get a share in the market rather than be left behind. That's my only thing.
Something like Dental Association, somebody recommending from USA that this is the right toothpaste, and then we get influenced. And
exactly. Whether we like it or not, it has a subliminal effect on us.
Correct, absolutely.
Thank you all for your patience. Just to sum up, I think we are all in a global market now, and for Indian brands to go global, I think the way to look at it is it's a double-edged sword. It offers immense opportunities to reach out to a global customer, given the internet penetration and the digitization that's happening. But on the other hand, it also offers stiff competition for Indian brands to be able to make a mark in the global market. So just to list out some of the pointers that our expert panelists have given. One is understand the market, product localization, global leadership, hire people who are tuned to global leadership, develop a risk-averse culture, build trust and credibility to transparency. I think the experts have given more than what we expected in such a short time. We covered so many sectors. It's been pleasant and thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you all so much for sparing valuable time and coming here.
One quick comment?
Please.
I think one quick last sort of a closing comment is, I think most of you are students here. I think my one sort of an advice will be, please look for more and more international internships. Go out and spend time abroad. I think it's very important that you start to do that. There are markets that are clearly ahead of us. I think getting an opportunity to work in those markets are going to they're going to give you a very different perspective. And I think that's a perspective that India really needs, right? So just look at more and more opportunities for yourself outside. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this instructive and interesting discussion. Yeah, sorry. Very informative for for the lack of a better term. And I would like to thank the panelists and the moderators for taking out their precious time. And now I would like our moderators to present the mementos to the panelists. Starting from Dr. Satish. Can we have a round of applause? Mr. Joseph John. Mr. Ashu Agarwal. And Ms. Komal Jha. Also, we would like to thank our moderators. Maruti, would you present them with the mementos?